Marcus Luttrell grew up in a part of Texas where toughness wasn't something you bragged about. It was something people assumed you had until proven otherwise. The summers could melt your patience, the winters could crack your resolve, and the people in between didn't give you much space to be fragile. Marcus and his twin brother Morgan learned early that you either kept up or you got run over, and neither boy had much interest in the latter. Their home wasn't a military camp, but discipline was baked into daily life just the same. Chores didn't wait, complaints didn't get traction, excuses disappeared faster than cold, sweet tea in July. Then came Billy Shelton, the retired Green Beret who might as well have been carved directly out of stubbornness. He ran what amounted to a no-nonsense conditioning program for any local kid foolish or ambitious enough to show up. Marcus and Morgan became regulars. Shelton never promised them greatness. He promised pain, a steady supply of it, delivered with the same matter-of-fact tone a mechanic uses when telling you your engine is shot. Marcus learned to push through soreness, fatigue, and doubt before he could legally drive. Shelton's backyard was where childish dreams went to die and hardened ambition took their place. By high school, Marcus had one goal and one goal only: become a Navy SEAL. He didn't arrive at the decision through poetry or inspiration. He arrived at it the way a climber arrives at a mountain. It was the hardest thing he could see, so he aimed straight at it. His twin brother followed the same path, naturally, because twins are like that. If one jumps into misery, the other one feels obligated to join out of principle. When Marcus finally enlisted, he felt less like he was leaving home and more like he was stepping onto the next brutal stepping stone he'd been preparing for since childhood. Texas had taught him discomfort. Shelton had taught him discipline. His own stubbornness filled in everything else. What waited for him in Coronado wasn't a surprise. It was a destination he'd been marching toward for years. And whatever suffering Buds had planned, Marcus wasn't planning to blink first. Coronado looks like the kind of place postcards are made of. Beaches, sunshine, joggers who look like they'll actually enjoy running. Then there's Buds, sitting in the middle of all that beauty like a tax audit with sand. Marcus Luttrell stepped into the grinder with the confidence only a Texas upbringing and a stubborn personality can produce. But Buds specializes in stripping confidence down to the studs. The instructors didn't need to tell candidates they weren't special. The Pacific Ocean handled that job with ruthless efficiency. The first few weeks hit Marcus like a freight train driven by someone with personal grievances against optimism. It wasn't just the physical punishment, though there was plenty of that. It was the constant reminder that fatigue wasn't theoretical. Men quit daily, some left quietly, others left dramatically, but they all walked past the same brass bell on their way out, giving it a ring that echoed across the compound like a funeral chime for ambition. Marcus heard that bell a lot. He just never got close enough to touch it. Injuries stacked up early. Stress fractures in his legs, bruises everywhere, cuts that never healed because salt water isn't known for its kindness. Marcus pushed through each one with a mixture of stubbornness and the kind of denial that borders on strategic self-delusion. He wasn't the fastest swimmer or the cleanest runner, but he could suffer longer than most, and in Buds, that trait is currency. Then came Hell Week, 5.5 days where sleep becomes a rumor and pain becomes background noise. Marcus hit the wall more than once, mentally and physically, but every time he did, someone next to him hit theirs harder. That's the secret of Hell Week. Your misery binds you to the men beside you. Marcus wasn't just fighting through for himself, he was fighting because the man next to him was falling apart too. Shared suffering hardens a team in ways comfort never could. By the end of Hell Week, Marcus looked half buried and barely functional, but he was still standing. The instructors noticed. SEALs don't need perfection. They need endurance wrapped in grit. Marcus had both. SQT followed, sharpening skills instead of pounding bodies. And by the time he pinned on the Trident, he wasn't the same man who stepped onto the grinder. He was leaner, tougher, and ready to do the work he'd been chasing since Shelton's backyard. And the world, particularly Afghanistan, was ready to hand him exactly that opportunity. Afghanistan in 2005 wasn't the kind of place that welcomed outsiders, and Kunar Province least of all. The mountains rose like jagged walls around valleys that had chewed up entire armies long before Americans ever arrived. Soviet maps from the 1980s may as well have been warnings. Enter at your own risk, expect casualties, and don't plan on getting comfortable. When SEAL Team 10 rotated into the area, they stepped into a region where every path was a sniper's alley, and every ridge hid men who knew how to fight on angles Americans weren't raised to understand. The name on everyone's radar was Ahmad Shah. He wasn't commanding legions, he didn't need to. His small insurgent cell specialized in ambushes, assassinations, and disappear into the trees guerrilla work that made him more dangerous than his numbers suggested. He had already struck Afghan government forces and American Marines, using the region's natural defenses to move like smoke between villages. Eliminating Shah was a priority, not because he was famous, but because he was effective, and he was getting bolder. The Marines crafted the framework for Operation Red Wings, and part of that framework required eyes on the ground before they could strike. They needed confirmation of Shah's location, his fighters, his movements. That meant a reconnaissance team, small, sharp, and quiet. SEAL Team 10 was tapped for the job, and Lieutenant Michael Murphy assembled a four-man element built for precision. Murphy himself, steady as bedrock, Danny Dietz, dependable and tough, the communications spine of the team, Matt Axe Axelson, whose calm trigger work could have been carved from marble, and Marcus Luttrell, the medic who could haul gear, patch holes, and shoot straight under pressure. Their objective was simple in description and unforgiving in reality. Infiltrate the mountains above the target village, observe without being detected, confirm Shah's presence, and call in the Marines to finish the job. Get in clean, stay hidden, get out clean. No heroics required, only competence. But missions live on paper before they live in mountains, and mountains have their own opinions. As the planning wrapped and the team loaded for insertion, no one said anything dramatic. Operators don't need omens to tell them a mission is dangerous. The terrain already said it loud enough. The MH-47 dropped into the mountains with the grace of a heavyweight fighter, loud, deliberate, and utterly unbothered by the altitude trying to choke its engines. The pilots carved through the valleys in darkness, using experience rather than comfort to guide them. When the Chinook finally flared for landing, the slope beneath it barely qualified as horizontal. Afghanistan doesn't offer proper landing zones. It offers temporary pauses in disaster. The moment the wheels touched, Marcus Luttrell, Michael Murphy, Danny Dietz, and Matt Axelson poured out into the night. The helicopter lifted away in a storm of dust and rotor wash, and then it was gone, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt staged. The team immediately began climbing toward their planned Overwatch site, every step a negotiation with gravity, loose shale, and the oppressive weight of gear that had somehow grown heavier since the last checkpoint. Communications degraded almost immediately. Radios flickered in and out as if the mountains were actively mocking them. It wasn't unusual for Kunar, but it was unwelcome all the same. Elevation changed everything. Breathing, hearing, movement. Even thought felt sluggish, as if each idea needed to climb its own hill before reaching consciousness. When the team reached their designated position, the terrain revealed itself as a liar. What looked flat on satellite imagery was pitched like a tilted deck. Trees and brush robbed them of clean sight lines. The location wasn't unusable, but it wasn't ideal either. The SEALs adjusted, as they always did, carving firing positions out of stubborn earth and preparing for a long watch. They didn't get one. The first sign of trouble wasn't a rifle shot or a distant silhouette. It was a bell, goat bells, the kind that would be charming anywhere except on a covert reconnaissance mission. Moments later, 3 goat herders emerged directly into the team's hide site. There was no time to move, no chance to reposition. The encounter was instant and unavoidable. The herders froze, the SEALs froze, and in that suspended moment, the mission's fragile invisibility shattered. After detaining the herders, the team gathered to confront a problem bigger than the mountain itself. Killing unarmed civilians violated the rules of engagement. Holding them indefinitely wasn't possible. Releasing them felt like inviting the worst-case scenario straight through the front door. Murphy made the only lawful call: let them go. They disappeared down the slope, and the team repositioned in tense silence. There was no argument, no dramatics, just 4 men absorbing the reality that their margin for error had evaporated. It was only a matter of time before the mountain delivered its response. The first shot wasn't a warning, it was an announcement. A crack split the air from somewhere high above, followed instantly by a storm of gunfire that hammered the SEAL's position from multiple angles. One moment the ridge was quiet, the next it felt like the mountain had erupted. Dust kicked up in violent bursts as the rounds tore through branches, rocks, and the thin slivers of concealment the team had been relying on. The Taliban hadn't just found them, they had surrounded them, elevated, dug in, and outnumbering them by dozens. Marcus Luttrell returned fire immediately. So did Murphy, Dietz, and Axelson. Years of training collapsed into muscle memory. There was no time to think, no time to panic, only time to fight. But the terrain was merciless. The SEALs were pinned on a slope with almost no cover, while Shah's fighters owned the high ground and the angles. Danny Dietz was hit early, a severe wound that made movement slower and radio work nearly impossible. But he kept going, firing, shifting, crawling, trying to keep the team connected to the outside world, even as his blood soaked into the soil. Dietz wasn't built for quitting, and he didn't start now. Matt Axe Axelson was fighting with a sniper's calm, even as rounds chewed into the rocks around him. When he was struck in the face, the hit was catastrophic, tearing into bone and vision. But Axe didn't stop. He fired through pain that would have incapacitated most men, maintaining deliberate, disciplined shots despite his world shrinking into a blur. That's who he was, precision incarnate, even while dying. Murphy moved like a man already aware of the math. He could see the angles, the enemy movements, the tightening noose. He fired methodically, repositioning the team as best he could, but the Taliban pressed harder with each minute, closing the distance with skill and aggression. The fight wasn't chaotic on their side. They were coordinated, using terrain with a fluency only locals possess. Marcus became a one-man circulation system, shooting, shifting, treating Dietz, treating himself, and then going right back to firing. At one point he took a fall that felt like dropping off a rooftop, slamming into the ground so hard he felt something give in his back. Spinal compression. He ignored it. There were no other options. The team couldn't hold the ridge. Every time they tried to stabilize, an RPG or concentrated burst forced them to move. So they fell, literally, down the slope in a series of brutal plunges, each one cracking bones, ripping flesh, and stripping away more of what little cover they had left. They tumbled and fought in cycles, survival measured not in minutes but in seconds. Dietz was hit again and again. His hands were broken. His movement slowed. He continued firing until he physically couldn't. Marcus tried to drag him, but Danny refused to be a burden. His last moments were spent facing the enemy, weapon up, still fighting. Murphy realized their only chance was to get a call out. The radios weren't working reliably, and the terrain was blocking every attempt. The satellite phone needed open sky. The only place with open sky was a bare rock outcropping, fully exposed to enemy fire. Murphy decided to go. He didn't hesitate, didn't say anything dramatic. He simply stepped into the open and walked uphill, directly into the kill zone. Rounds tore into him immediately. He reached the clearing, knelt, and made a call. His voice was calm, clear, and impossibly steady, given the circumstances. Midway through, he was hit again, dropping the phone. He picked it up and finished the message. He walked back into the fight, firing until another burst struck him down. He died the way he lived, quietly brave, relentlessly steady, giving everything he had so the team had a chance. Axe continued fighting long after his body should have failed him. His accuracy, even half blind, was staggering. Eventually, surrounded and critically wounded, he fell defending his last position. Marcus ran, fell, crawled, whatever kept him alive, until the mountain swallowed him into a narrow crevice. The gunfire raged above, then receded. When silence finally settled, it was the heavy, suffocating silence of a battlefield where the dead outnumber the living. Marcus Luttrell was alone, shattered, hunted, barely breathing. And the fight wasn't over. When Lieutenant Michael Murphy's sat phone call broke through the static and chaos, it triggered an immediate reaction at the operations center. The message wasn't long and it wasn't clean, but it was unmistakable. The team was in a fight so bad that even Murphy, calm, composed, never rattled Murphy, had been forced into the open to call for help. In the special operations world, that alone was a red flare fired straight into the sky. The quick reaction force was scrambled in minutes. The men launching were the best of the best, 8 SEALs and 8 Night Stalkers from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The Night Stalkers flew into places most pilots only see in nightmares. They knew the mountains, the downdrafts, the way the terrain squeezed a helicopter like a fist. But they also knew that SEALs were dying on the ground, and that made the decision simple. Their aircraft, Turbine 33, pushed into the valleys with urgency bordering on violence. The Chinook's rotors clawed at thin mountain air while the pilots threaded the aircraft through narrow corridors at altitudes that punished every mistake. The plan was to insert a rescue team fast enough to tilt the battle before it collapsed completely. But the Taliban understood American tactics too well. They knew a QRF would come, and they positioned RPG teams high on the ridgelines, patient and waiting. As Turbine 33 slowed near the insertion point, the helicopter became a silhouette against the sky, just long enough for an RPG gunner to take the shot he'd been preparing for. The rocket slammed into the Chinook's rear section with a blast that tore through metal and momentum alike. The aircraft dropped, struck the slope, and exploded. All 16 men aboard were killed instantly. It was the deadliest day for naval special warfare since World War II, and the kind of loss that sends shockwaves through every unit, every family, every man who ever stepped onto a helicopter not knowing if he'd step off again. Turbine 33 never reached Marcus, and Marcus, hiding broken inside a crevice, had no idea the rescue meant for him had been destroyed overhead. When the last echoes of gunfire faded and the smoke drifted off into the tree line, Marcus Luttrell wasn't so much alive as he was refusing to die. Everything hurt, breathing felt like dragging air past broken glass, and his legs didn't seem particularly interested in following commands. But he forced himself forward, crawling downhill toward the faint sound of running water, not because it was a plan, but because it was the only direction that made sense. He reached a small spring and drank until his stomach cramped. The cold water shocked his system awake, if only barely. The world around him pulsed in and out, colors too bright one moment and washed out the next. He knew the Taliban were searching. He could hear distant voices, see the shifting shadows of men moving through the brush. Marcus pressed himself into the terrain, using the mountain like a shield. If they found him now, injured and alone, the fight would be mercifully short. Hours passed in fragments. He crawled, rested, crawled again. Eventually he collapsed near a downed tree, convinced that this was where everything would end. But instead of insurgents, 3 Afghan villagers emerged from the forest, men with tools, not rifles. Marcus raised his weapon with trembling arms, ready to fire if he had to, but the villagers didn't move aggressively. One of them, Mohammed Gulab, approached slowly, hand pressed to his own chest in a gesture of peace. Gulab made a choice in that moment that defied fear, politics, and common sense. He invoked Pashtunwali, the ancient Afghan code of honor demanding protection of guests, even at great personal risk. Under Pashtunwali, Marcus wasn't an enemy combatant. He was a man in need, and therefore under the village's protection. The villagers lifted him onto a blanket and carried him to Sabre, a small stone and dirt village tucked into the folds of the mountain. They cleaned his wounds, brought him bread and water, and shielded him from view. Marcus faded in and out of consciousness, but he understood enough to know he wasn't being turned over to the Taliban. The Taliban understood it too, and they didn't appreciate the defiance. Fighters stormed through Sabre, demanding Marcus. They threatened Gulab's family, threatened to burn the village, threatened to kill anyone hiding the American. Gulab refused every time. Pashtunwali wasn't negotiable. The villagers moved Marcus between hiding spots, behind walls, under ledges, into goat pens, anywhere the Taliban wouldn't think to check. Guards armed with aging rifles watched over him at night. Eventually, word of the wounded American reached an Afghan militia leader who had contact with U.S. forces. That spark traveled up the chain until it reached the men who'd been searching for days. Help was finally coming. When word finally reached the U.S. forces that an American was alive somewhere in Kunar's backcountry, the mood shifted instantly from grim recovery to urgent action. For days they had been pulling bodies off mountainsides and logging catastrophic losses. Now, suddenly, there was a pulse, faint, fragile, but real. They mobilized immediately, pushing helicopters, ground elements, and air support towards the coordinates provided by local intermediaries. No one needed a pep talk. After the loss of Turbine 33, bringing one man home meant something profound. In Sabre, the villagers began hearing the distant thump of rotor blades echoing through the valley. Gulab guided Marcus outside, helping him stand long enough to make himself visible. Marcus was barely conscious, drifting in and out, but the presence of helicopters in the sky cut through the haze. For the first time since the ambush, survival felt like a possibility rather than a delaying tactic. The first U.S. aircraft to crest the ridge spotted movement near the village. Villagers waving cloth, pointing, signaling. The pilot confirmed it over the radio. "We've got him." Within minutes, armed rescue teams touched down on uneven ground and moved straight toward Gulab's position. They found Marcus gaunt, dehydrated, riddled with shrapnel, and somehow still holding on to consciousness by instinct more than strength. The operators carried him to the helicopter as Apaches circled overhead, ready to erase anything with bad intentions. As the aircraft lifted off, Marcus caught sight of Gulab one last time, a man who had risked everything simply because his code demanded it. Gratitude didn't need language. The look exchanged between them was enough. At the base, medical teams rushed him into treatment. Surgeons worked on his broken vertebrae, torn flesh, embedded metal fragments. But the hardest blow came when Marcus learned what had happened to his teammates, and to the men aboard Turbine 33. The news hollowed him out in a way no injury ever could. Physical recovery had a plan. Emotional recovery didn't. Back home, the weight of survival lingered like a second shadow. Marcus struggled with nightmares, survivor's guilt, and the impossible task of explaining to families what their sons had done on that mountain. Eventually, he chose to tell the story directly. Through the book Lone Survivor, written to ensure Murphy, Dietz, and Axelson were remembered not as casualties, but as warriors who fought with impossible courage. The story resonated far beyond the military community. It became a testament to brotherhood, sacrifice, and the brutal realities of war. Marcus later created the Lone Survivor Foundation to help veterans facing the same invisible wounds he carried. Operation Red Wings didn't define him, but the men he served with did, and telling their story became the most important mission of his life. I'm Dave. I appreciate you watching. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share. And until next time, stand tall.
Oh, Dave.